Am I back? I appear to be back. I'm back.
Welcome back.
We've done it. Alright. We're still live, but we went dead for a bit. So, what was I saying? Right, feedback.
Game
Yeah,
does
the
a
game-
shady job at
Yeah, game does a shady job at giving you feedback, and it's you can do all sorts of right things and get bad results, and because it's a game of imperfect information, you end up having these really weird situations where you have to do mixed strategies. Stuff like, like, do I gank, do I not gank, right? Well, you're gonna gank like 30% of the time. Because you want to be able to make them respect the fact that you could be there, but it's not really that efficient to be there, so you don't want to be there all the time. You want to be there just enough that they have to play around it sometimes, but not so often enough that you're missing out on the opportunity to do something even better. Okay. Yes, I'm going. Just going to be a little bit later. So the next point is that practice both uses and improves mental representations hand in hand. These representations both show how to do the thing and also notice and correct when doing the wrong thing, right? So if you have some kind of a mental model for what success looks like in lane, involving maybe killing your lane opponent, going up in CS, taking their tower, when some of these things don't happen, you're able to notice them and kind of reflect on it and say, okay, well, what happened such that it prevented me from doing that, right? And this is what allows you to improve. But also, the fact that you know that those are things that you should do means that when you're given the opportunity to do those things, you'll do them. And this is what allows the mental models to be useful in performance. So they're both. They're both performance and their improvement at the same time. Deliberate practice involves building of skills on top of each other. And a teacher must be cognizant that that this happens and provide a solid foundation of fundamentals early on to minimize the chance of a student needing to relearn deeply important skills later on, right? If you're already in Challenger, relearning how to do camera control is way harder than if you're in Silver and you have only been playing for a couple of months. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a question, right? So, hell, I don't even know why I say rank, right? Like, if you've been playing for 10 years with a certain style of camera control and you try to change it, it's way harder than if you've been playing for 6 months with a certain style of camera control. Right? So, one of the most important things that can be done in the world of League of Legends coaching is figuring out what the fundamentals are and figuring out how to teach them, right? And that's something that we've been trying to do with minor success, I would say. Minor success. But I think we still have a long way to go. So. You got something?
I'm wondering, if the problem isn't that we teach fundamentals, but the game is fundamentally so complicated that we still haven't derived the real fundamentals out of it. Like, we say, fundamental of CSing, of blah, 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 of this, of that. But, maybe realistically, even below that, there's a level of fundamental where it's, only 3 or 4 major skills that then branch out into minor skills. Maybe we haven't even gotten to the bottom level yet, because,
damage, foresight, movement, foresight, Yomi.
Yeah, there we go. But then, the thing is, a lot of people will be like, oh, CSing is a fundamental, or, trading is a fundamental, wave management is like fundamental. Whereas like to me, it's like wave management is a fundamental that encompasses farming, minion wave management, and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So it's like they're clearly not at the same level. Because if somebody you can't wave manage, there's pretty much no reason to even try to look at trading or harassing, right?
Yeah. I would say, there's an order to building the skills, and I think that CSing actually does come first. But I would say, a conversation about, what are the fundamentals and how do we learn them? I think that's a great conversation to have. I think it's way too big for this format. And we should definitely have it, but I don't necessarily want to get into it right now because it's just so huge. You know what I mean? But, I would say to immediately go back on what I just said and instead continue to talk about it. I think that you can kind of sum up almost everything in League of Legends as 4 things: damage foresight, movement foresight, character control, and Yomi. Right? Being able to visualize what will happen, being able to do what you need to do, and being able to decide what you want. And I dare anyone to disagree with me.
I disagree with you.
Okay.
I don't know why. You told me, you dared me, so I did.
I dared you, so you did. Okay. Well, I think that's it. I think at the core of League of Legends, when you look at every fantastic outplay in any scenario, the things that are at work are somebody did more damage than someone else expected. Somebody moved to a different position than the other person expected. Somebody was thinking at one step ahead of the other person in some way, or somebody had finer control over their character than the other. And if you were absolutely perfect at all of those 4 things, I think that there would be almost no way to lose. Because I think everything can be derived from that.
I agree with that.
I actually think that's kind of astounding, actually. I don't think I've ever.
Agree, or
I don't think I've ever. No, not that you're that you agree. I mean, yes, that you agree also, but I've never really summed it up so cleanly before. It kind of just happened. Very interesting. So, with that bombshell out of the way, most importantly, you learn from the best predecessors. Right? If you want to have damage foresight like Fakers, if you want to have movement foresight like Fakers, if you want to have character control like Fakers, what do you got to do? Right? Even in one of the kind of recent interviews where I think it was like pro players talking about each other or something, right? There was like a dev article, actually. That was what it was. I was reading like some kind of a dev update about TFT and scrolled down on the page, and there was like an article by somebody who works for Riot on what makes someone good in League of Legends, right? And he kind of went through a lot of these different things in terms of that the stats don't really work, and a lot of people just kind of do it by gut, right? But one of the things that one of the pro players mentioned when asked, what makes somebody good is one of the aspects of character control, that being clicking close to your champion so that you can rotate faster, right? So, being someone who can move their character more cleanly than somebody else gives you such a tremendous inherent advantage, right? And when we think about, what are the most important tips that you could give to some new guy starting out, right? Like, legit, right? Like, what are actually good tips, right? Play a small champion pool. Click close to your champion. Think from your opponent's perspective. Right? I mean, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think that's like decent advice myself.
I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the best players in the world, like if we pull up a VOD of Dopa, right? What makes watching Dopa so much more impressive than watching any other player in the world? It's that his movement is so fucking clean. It's that his damage foresight is so fucking clean. He wins every fight with 10 HP. He dodges every skill shot by 10 range. He is always one step ahead of the enemy laner. It's always happening. And just like the sheer, I mean, obviously the games are cherry-picked, so I'm, blowing it up a little bit, but like the sheer consistency that the guy can do it with, even within a game, to be able to get to the point where he's able to do it, to even give performances like the ones that he cherry-picks for his YouTube channel, is astounding. The guy's an absolute monster, right? And he's a monster for these reasons. His fundamentals are just head and shoulders above almost everyone else. And, his strategy game's really good too. You know what I mean? It's But I would argue that his strategy game is probably good because of all of these things, right? It's easy to make the right decision if you know with close to certainty what will happen when you do all of the different things, Evaluating the value of different positions is not actually that difficult if you can play out what will happen from that position. You know what I mean? It's like in chess, right? Like if you're exploring a line, right, to be able to evaluate, is moving the pawn there good or is it moving there good? Well, I don't know. I mean, they look the same, right? You know what I mean? But like, when you look at that versus, a bunch of other moves, the way that you're evaluating them is what's going to happen if I do that. What moves does that give my opponent? And then what moves would that give me? And so on and so forth, right? And you go all the way down in these different levels. And that idea of, I think these are about it. Interesting.
I mean, I really kind of like this chapter a lot because of these ideas that like practice isn't fun, but like for me specifically with like the ADHD, the interest-based nervous system, it's very hard for me to feel fulfilled with practice. And like for me, there are some days where I can sit down and practice for an hour and a half and feel pretty good about it, and then like other days it's like pulling teeth. And so it's like for me, I think it's about finding that sort of middle zone where I can kind of like be okay with being kind of bored, but not so much so that I feel like I need to get up and do something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%. And I mentioned in private, but I think this is a big part of why people with ADHD also tend to get diagnosed with learning disabilities and tend to struggle with the learning process. It's because if you've got an interest-based nervous system where the entire thing is you do what's interesting and that's all you're able to do, then doing things that are uninteresting because of motivation and importance and things like that, of course you're going to struggle with that. That's like literally the definition of what it is, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult to work with, but you get some benefits too. So
yeah, the thing is that like also with somebody who finds the thing that they're so driven that they can deal with the practice and stuff, they tend to get to the top of the field really fast. And it's not like I'm not driven to play League, it's just that like when I feel like I'm progressing fast enough, that's when I start to feel really driven. But then when I'm not able to see the progress right away, like it's not. It's like with the piano, it's so much easier to see that I'm better than I was yesterday just by recording.
So much more clear,
right. So it's like with League, I'm sitting there practicing, whatever for a month or 2 weeks or whatever, and then I go into games and I'm like, I'm dying for the exact same reasons at the exact same times every other time, and even though there may be slightly different reasons for them, like maybe in this matchup I stepped too far up, or this matchup I got ganked, right? But like, it still doesn't feel any better.
Yeah. And I feel, part of that I feel like is that the feedback is unclear, right? Both from the game and from your coaches. But also, it's just that the game has not been developed enough for us to really be doing deliberate practice, right? You know, like, it's like nobody really knows what perfect League of Legends looks like right now, you know? And even once you get above a certain level, it's really tough to tell what's going to be better than another thing, and to figure out what the mental models are that the pros are using and things like that, right? You know, it's like the progress is not linear in League of Legends for a multitude of reasons, but one of the most important ones is just that the game is so new that we don't even know what good looks like yet, really, and how to get there. So, you know, it's not quite a highly developed field. We're getting there. We're definitely getting there, but it's rough. And to that point, this is the basic blueprint for getting better in any pursuit. Get as close to deliberate practice as you can. If you're in a field where deliberate practice is an option, you should take that option. If not, apply the principles of deliberate practice as much as possible. Practice, this often boils down to purposeful practice with a few extra steps. First, identify the expert performers, then figure out what they do that makes them so good, then come up with training techniques that allow you to do it too. I think this about sums it up, right? You know, it's like the difficulty is in those steps, you know, right? Like, first, identify the expert performers. Great. We have some measures to do that, but as we've kind of discovered, right, you know, being at the top of the solo queue ladder doesn't necessarily mean that you are a strong player. The game is so new, and progress through a ladder is slow enough, and it's, you know, it's not a measurement of skill, it's just a measurement of progression through the system, right? That you know, it's very highly weighted towards people who play more as opposed to people who are higher skilled, right? The fact that pro players don't necessarily take solo queue super seriously, right, means that competition at the top of the ladder doesn't tend to be perhaps what it could be, right? And the fact that you never see the pros playing at their best against what solo queue has to offer means that, you know, it can be difficult to identify who the expert performers even are. Then you have to figure out what they do that makes them so good. That alone is very difficult, you know? Especially if you're not somebody with very highly developed mental models of how the game works. You might watch a pro player and be like, he's doing the same thing I'm doing. I don't understand. Yeah, I could be challenger, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, until you're able to figure out what it is that's different, it's really tough to practice in that direction, right? You know, so the perception part is also difficult in League of Legends, in no small part because it's a game of incomplete information, in no small part because it's a game with a deep amount of counterplay and Yomi levels and things like this, where the decision that you see a pro player make may not be the decision that you should make in your games. And then come up with training techniques that allow you to do it too. Almost nobody in the scene knows hardly anything about teaching or training. So, you know, this is one of the things that we hope to do, right, is to learn more about that, to give us an edge on this particular point. But, yeah, no, all three of these things are very difficult in League of Legends. So, we kind of get deliberate practice, but only somewhat. He mentions, be careful, people regarded as experts aren't necessarily experts by objective measures, right? You know, I mean, like, being in Challenger doesn't make you good, being good makes you in Challenger, right? And, you know, he mentions that it's difficult to say why experts are better because a lot of the times it has to do with their mental models, right? This is kind of what we've been talking about, right? You know, it's like if you have a mental model of how you should make your decisions, then at any given moment, you know, let's say there's like 10 different things the opponent could have done, right? If they're able to select the correct response to 10 different questions, right? But you only see them answer one question, you know, you need to watch them a lot in order to understand how they play in a variety of different situations. I think it's good. Right? I think actually this will finally allow her to win. And if you can't figure out what they do differently while performing, see if you can figure out what they do differently while training, right? We don't get hardly any info about how pro players train. We get a good amount of info about how solo queue players train because they tend to stream all the time. And honestly, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better thing to watch than a stream to figure out how the best League of Legends players play. You know, I mean, it's like if you're in a traditional sport, it can be much, much more difficult to figure out how the pro players are doing what they're doing, actually, because training happens behind closed doors and there's no cameras on it, right? We're actually pretty lucky as a community that streaming is such a big part of the League of Legends culture, and that gives us such a great window into what it is that pro players are doing and how they're doing it, all that kind of different stuff. But we don't see scrims, and we very, very infrequently see reviews.
Yeah, so I think that may really help her. I hope it does.
Things can be tough. Also, whenever possible, work with a coach. Sunglasses emoji. Let's go.
No.
So, anybody else have anything on deliberate practice before we move on to talking about the 10,000 hour rule? Okay. So he mentions that the 10,000 hour rule came up in the is it Michael Gladwell? No. What's his first name? It's somebody Gladwell, yeah?
Malcolm.
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, she didn't make it?
Has the... welcome, by the way, Cyclone. That was very interesting. So, he mentions that Malcolm Gladwell kind of talked about this 10,000 hour rule, and he mentions that it was based on a study that he actually did, right? You know, this study of violin students. But he mentions that Gladwell got a lot of things wrong.
And it was... I don't know, if you watched all those songs.
Hey, Johnny?
Hey.
Whatever. Different Johnny. My Uncle Johnny. The one who's talking in the background. Anyway. So, yeah.
I was like, oh, but someone else must have just realized I was here.
Yeah. No. So, the 10,000 hour rule is not actually a rule. It just happened to be the number of hours that somebody had practiced, that violin students in this specific study had practiced on average by the time they were 20, or something along those lines, right? And Gladwell kind of spun it in this direction of, like, if you put 10,000 hours of practice into anything, you'll become a master, right? And that's...
Can I add
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, go for it.
I think I remember reading about this, and I think the context was more like, I don't think it was Gladwell himself that made a really, really strong argument that you need to have 10,000 hours. But it was like all the media that reported on it, applied it down to that. So although he kind of was saying, like, well, you should roughly aim for this.
Yeah,
like, the media were like, if you do 10,000 hours, you'll get it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and Morgan Press will impress them.
Yeah. No, there's a wonderful quote.
They dumbed it down a bit.
Yeah, there's a quote that pretty much sums it up, actually. So, to reference the Beatles in relation to the 10,000 hour rules, the authors say, but an hour of playing in front of a crowd where the focus is on delivering the best possible performance at the time is not the same as an hour of focused, goal-driven practice that is designed to address certain weaknesses and make certain improvements. The sort of practice that was the key factor in explaining the abilities of the Berlin student violinists, right? You know, and this is, I think, something that a lot of people... We've talked about it like 4 times already, but I'm going to keep talking about it because it's still important, right? So many people play solo queue and have no idea whether they're playing to perform or whether they're playing to improve, and they try to do both at once and end up doing neither well. Right? And this is, I think, why it's so important to have a Smurf or be comfortable playing normals or something where you really do feel free to experiment and not worry about whether you're doing well or doing poorly. Right? To have an area where you can do that is exceptionally important. And when so many people are so caught up about their rank and they that they really feel a pressure to perform every single game. It can be really, really difficult to force yourself to do something that you don't think is optimal, in order to explore it, right? To play a new champion that you're not familiar with, right? There's all sorts of different things.
They don't have good enough courses inland.
They don't have good enough courses inland. But the next quote that kind of addresses the whole kind of Gladwell thing is this. The final problem with the 10,000 hour rule is that, although Gladwell himself didn't say this, many people have interpreted it as a promise that almost anyone can become an expert in a given field by putting in 10,000 hours of practice. But nothing in my study implied this. To show a result like this, I would have needed to put a collection of randomly chosen people through 10,000 hours of deliberate practice on the violin, and then see how they turned out. All that our study has shown was that among the students who had become good enough to be admitted to the Berlin Music Academy, the best students had put in, on average, significantly more hours of solitary practice than the better students, and the better and best students had put in more solitary practice than the music education students. This is all that the study shows. And this is a kind of an important point, honestly, I think, right? The whole book is kind of trying to give this really inspiring message that, you practice something, you can get better at it, and then that maybe will allow you to achieve your dreams, right? But that hasn't necessarily been proven. All that really has been proven is that if you practice in the right way long enough, you'll get better. You won't necessarily become the best, but you will get better. And if what you want is to be the best, your only real option is to do this and see what happens, right? So, does that seem like a reasonable analysis to you, gentlemen?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
I think. Do you just ask? Does that seem like an analysis?
Does that sound like a reasonable analysis?
Oh, I was like, I mean, you can answer that, but I don't think you're going to get anything from it.
No. Does that sound like a reasonable analysis?
I think you're asking for prescriptive feedback, right? You want to ask for descriptive feedback. How did the analysis make you feel?
Thank you. This is why we need you on the show more often. Good God.
On the show.
Yeah.
Well, it's 8:30 a.m., good sir, and I refuse to depart from my sleep earlier than...
Understood. So, follow-up quote. The authors say, the question of whether anyone can become an expert in a given field by taking part in enough designed practice is still open, and I will offer some thoughts on this issue in the next chapter. Ooh, goody. I am looking forward to that one. But there was nothing in the original study to suggest that it was so. Kind of already talked through this point, so I'll just go on. Last, final quote of the day. When we say that it takes 10,000 or however many hours to really become good at something, we put the focus on the daunting nature of the task. While some may take this as a challenge, many will see it as a stop sign. Why should I even try if it's going to take me 10,000 hours to get really good? But I see the core message as something else altogether. In pretty much any area of human endeavor, people have a tremendous capacity to improve their performance as long as they train in the right way. If you practice something for a few hundred hours, you will almost certainly see great improvement. But you have only scratched the surface. You can keep going and going and going, getting better and better and better. How much you improve is up to you. And I agree. I think this is a really, really powerful message, right?
Well, it seems a little contradictory to me because he's all like, you can practice a lot, but you might not get better. And then he's like, hey, if you practice a few hundred hours, you're going to get better. It's like...
I think I'd like to make the distinction. You can practice a lot. You may not become the best. But if you practice, you will get better. I think that's the distinction that must be made.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, it's not that by putting in 10,000 hours of practice you will become a master. It's that the more you practice, the better you will get, and that is a linear relationship, right? Roughly. So
it is unlikely that you'll get worse by practicing.
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard to do. Well, no, actually, it's pretty easy to do. It's pretty easy to do in any field that isn't a developed field, right? If you're doing purposeful practice, it's actually decidedly easy to practice and get worse, right? If you decide that something that you should try to do is better, and then you practice doing that, and then it's worse, then, like, yeah, it's very easy to practice being worse. Maybe that doesn't happen super often, but I think it's definitely possible.
Well, then, is it? Can they even make the claim that practice will make you better if you do a lot of practice?
The entire rest of the book has been caveating the right type of practice. You know what I mean?
Which book is it again?
This is Peak, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. Anders Ericsson,
Okay.
Robert Poole.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. I'm just trying to remember if I've actually read it. I feel like I have.
Mm-hmm.
But it must have been a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. I like this book. I have been quoting it to people, like, actually nonstop on Reddit. My god. Like...
It sounds like an exercise in futility.
It's actually gone pretty well so far, believe it or not. You know, there's a lot of people like, how do I get good? And I'm like, you must practice purposefully. Here are the steps to practicing purposefully. You must get outside of your comfort zone. You must remain focused. You must set goals. You must come up with a plan to reach those goals. And you must maintain your motivation.
Right, so the difference is that he's giving them the steps to do it, right? Where a lot of people are like, hey, just deliberately practice. And then
Click better,
people
by
are
the way.
like... Right, so like a lot of people are definitely, I think, going to receive certain advice much worse. But if you phrase it in a specific way, I think it's, for the most part, people at least hear it. Right, they may not do it, but they'll at least hear it.
I think I've linked it to I think I've quoted it to about like 4 or 5 people at this point, and I think 2 of them responded favorably, 2 of them did not respond, and 1 of them responded like an idiot. I think that's basically what happened so far. So, I call that pretty good success rate, honestly. You know, sample size, by the way.
Sample size, by the way, indeed.
Yeah. But, yeah. It's been really good. So, shall we wrap up? What do you think are the, what do you think is the thing that you're taking away from this, Stilgar?
Jesus Christ, I hate this question.
I'm getting you outside of your comfort zone. Get learned.
What's the bit that's in your brain?
Da-dum. 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 Da-dum.
Oh, if he's not going to say anything right away, I mean, I can say what I thought.
Go for it.
Yes, please.
Hit us with it.
So what I took away is that maybe I need to spend more time actually putting the number of hours I practice per week onto a sheet and see what my productivity is. Because I say that I practice a lot of things, right? But like maybe I'm not actually putting as many hours as I think I am. Maybe I'm actually putting in like 2 hours or something a day, or like maybe even like an hour because I spend maybe 10 minutes at a time feeling really focused and good, and then like the next 20 minutes I'm on Facebook or something, right? That happens sometimes. And so, like, if I'm able to, I think, say, okay, I'm going to spend 4 hours a day practicing this skill for a month, and then we'll see at the end. Like, actual 4 hours a day, not like 20 or 30 minutes and then some Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And then, judge progress that way, rather than just being like, hey, it doesn't feel better, so it's not better.
No, feeling can be good, but it's not the end-all metric by any means.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to try to take more serious time logs, which I usually been told to do that more, but never really thought it to be that important, even after reading the book the first time. So.
Yeah, that's the thing that I love about. I mean, even I'm getting like 70% more out of the book by reading it, taking notes, and coming here and discussing with you guys. I think it's really fun. So, definitely enjoying that. Dilga, have you got something yet, or should I go?
Please go.
Okay. So I'm taking two things out of this. The one is that I think I need to spend more time watching pro players and trying to figure out what they're doing. Right? I think I've been neglecting my my like analysis of high level gameplay and my learning about new techniques and keeping up with the meta and that sort of stuff. And I need to figure out a way to shoehorn that into my already impossible schedule.
I know that in my case too, specifically.
Yeah.
Watching skill count videos where they go and analyze the best players and tell you, using other high level players to make videos. They tell you, which was like, that has been, I think, the most eye opening thing for me. Because the first time I had it, it was like I watched through them and I didn't really think about them. But then after I started thinking about them and how to apply them, it's sort of like, now I'm like seeing a lot more detail in the learning phase that I never saw before. And so like being able to have the high level people, able to do that, and like, so maybe part of it too is to find somebody who's master or challenger level and even ask them like, how do what do you think about this thing?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I would like to at some point do, I don't know when exactly I would get around to doing this, God knows it won't be soon, but one of the things that I'd like to do is I'd like to do a series where I like watch and do like replay reviews of some of the best players and kind of break down, okay, like here's why what they're doing is impressive and different than what you're doing, and like maybe how can you get better at doing that, you know what I mean? I think that would be like a really interesting series, kind of like an eye on the fundamentals while watching the pros, basically pointing out what they do super consistently that is super important that most people don't do consistently, that kind of stuff. The other thing that I'm taking out of it is that idea of like, maybe we haven't hit the bottom level of what the fundamentals are really, and the kind of 4 that I came up with. Johnny, I think you're going to be really interested in these. So
yeah, I'm listening.
Here's the 4. I'm making a statement. I'm going bold. We're doing it. Every single ability or skill in League of Legends can be traced back to one of these 4 fundamental skills. Are you ready? I'm going to hit you with them. Damage foresight, movement foresight, character control, Yomi.
Okay, I'm just going to think for a minute. Are you using Matt Thornton's definition of fundamental?
I have to think about that.
Using what as the fundamental?
Yes, I think I am.
No.
So Matt Thornton's definition Matt Thornton's definition of a fundamental is I know where it is. I can go grab it. Matt Thornton.
It's more or less that it's something that everyone does. Everyone does it the same way.
Same.
Yeah. Like there's a few other things, but those are the main ones.
Yeah. Everyone must, and you have to do it viscerally while rolling. It must be automated to play well.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing too is that League is such a new game that it's probably pretty impossible to have really nailed down fundamentals at their most basic level.
I mean, your argument's just kind of saying we can't be right because no one else has been right yet. Which I think I was saying that we can't say that we absolutely know that fundamentals are, just because like we can't say that we know for sure that the fundamentals that everybody agrees with are actually the fundamentals because the game's so young. So if somebody distills it lower down doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. Doesn't necessarily mean they're right either.
we haven't been in the game space long enough to really be certain that what we think are the fundamentals now are probably the real fundamentals, is I think what you're trying to say, yeah? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
I mean, you never really... okay, there's a discussion here, but like...
Yeah.
The TLDR is I did a class at uni on the philosophy of science, and basically the whole class was them being like, but you can't really know that.
I
have
agree.
taken similar classes,
Well, I mean,
and
that's
the
sort of the-
conclusion is the same.
Yeah.
That is sort of the
And,
whole definition upon which empirical
What
science
is knowledge,
based on.
by the way?
Okay, let's not derail this, but
Yeah.
but the high level. I just want to expand your mind a bit. Is that there is an argument to be made. Whether or not you think it's reasonable is up to you. That's part of philosophy. But like, there's an argument to be made, actually, that even with the most deductive empirical science possible, you cannot prove things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you want to find out more, just Google like the philosophy of science. I'm sure there'll be
No,
lots of stuff.
I've taken similar types of courses that talked about the falsity of empirical science and why.
Yeah.
Even if you record something a million times, if it goes wrong even once, that sort of
which
throws the
is
whole
kind
wrench
of
into
the
your model.
Yeah, which is kind of the problem with saying that, like, well, at some stage we'll discover the fundamentals. So I just kind of like, well, we don't know for sure, but what's
This is the best
model
we've
we
got,
can
yeah.
come up with?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and so Sam is saying it's about damage foresight, movement foresight. What were the other two?
Character control and
Character
Yomi.
control and Yomi.
Control and Yumi.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something everyone who plays BJJ needs to know how to do. If you can't calculate your damage, or calculate where somebody can be, or control your character, or understand the different like levels of counterplay, you are doomed. Everyone needs to know how to do it. Something everyone who plays will do in essentially the same way. This, I think, is
Okay.
maybe more up for debate, right? Whether people do damage foresight, movement foresight, character control, and Yomi in the same way, I think is definitely not necessarily something I can prove. But something that everyone who plays needs to do viscerally while rolling, i.e. without conscious thought, in order to play the game well. I think that's definitely true. If you're thinking
What
about
is-
how much
what is
damage
max?
somebody's going to do... you were saying?
I was just saying, what does Matt say the fundamentals of BJJ are?
He doesn't even define them. He defines it by like
definition,
example of
rather
the of not it, right? He says, as an example, not everyone who plays BJJ at the black belt level plays an X guard. Rickson, to my knowledge, never played this guard or this type of half guard game. As such, I would not consider X guard a fundamental. This does not mean that some black belts will not use X guard. It certainly doesn't mean that I won't teach X guard, but it means you can be a good black belt without having one.
Okay.
Uh,
So okay,
contrast
but-
with
but-
an elbow escape. Every black belt on the planet has a solid elbow escape, or should. Right? The mechanics
Okay.
behind the basic motion don't change. The physics of the movement remain the same regardless of age, weight,
Okay.
etc. It's you just do it without having to stop. and think about it.
Okay. Hold on. So I think the category of things that he's putting as fundamental is like different to the category of things that you're putting as fundamental. Now, I don't know if I disagree with you, but I almost think like,
It's like one level up, yeah?
well, I think what you're saying is like, I mean, if you think about like, I mean, how does damage foresight isn't really even a thing that you do. It's just a thing that happens. Like, you just like take in information and your brain does.
Let
a
me
calculation.
rephrase.
It's kind-
Estimating
it's kinda
damage.
like- no. Well,
I would argue that in order to be able to take in the information, you have to know what information is there anyway, and I think that's the core of damage foresight, of knowing that it's possible for the least combination of skills to do this much, regardless
Well,
of
I
whether you know the actual numbers or whatever.
I don't think that's how people actually do damage foresight.
I
My
know it's-
personal opinion is that the way damage foresight works is that there is like a constant like punch bag in the game, which is minions, and you get to see how much, like, every time you cast a spell and you hit a champion or a minion, you see like, oh, it chunked it this much, and then you just like look at someone else and you're like, oh, they have like 2 armor items, like it'll probably do like
I
like,
definitely
your
do
brain
not do armor.
just-
I definitely do not do it that way.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm speaking from the
Um,
perspective of like talking to pros. Like
That's definitely how I do it.
sit there. They don't like when I'm playing a burst champion. I still like if I'm playing fucking Vega and I want to know if I can one shot someone in an ARAM. Like I just look at my spells and like add up the numbers and then take off 30%. You know, like that's how I do the damage calculation. But the people who are best in the world at the game aren't doing that, especially for the stuff that they actually are used to. Right? They just when they throw a Lee Sin Q and it does like X like chunk to a thing in the game, they're like, oh cool, like that felt like this much.
Yeah.
Like I think that's how the damage foresight is happening. It's like they're constantly updating it throughout the game because they're hitting things with spells.
Yes.
Wouldn't that mean that they're being more conscious for damage foresight than you initially argued for? Because if they throw a Lee Sin Q at something and they're saying, okay, this is how much I do, and then updating that in their mind,
I think that's like a figure of speech. They're not actually saying that to themselves. It's just they're noticing it and being like,
Well,
you know?
That's still conscious, though.
Well, but okay, I'm not intending it that it could be conscious. I'm not saying it can't be, but I'm not saying it has to be either. Like I think players do a lot, like high level players do a lot of stuff by feel.
Yes.
Like a lot of the time, the discussions we have in a game after a particular play will just be like, one player will be like, I can kill them, and the other one will be like, no, you can't. Like,
yeah, God, like, so true.
There's no like.
I know that I've done that with Sam, and he's done that with me too.
Yeah, it's just you. I think at like a fundamental like, and maybe I shouldn't use that word, but at like a neurological level,
like a base level.
People just. I think we can have a theory about like what people pay attention to and stuff, but I think the reality is that when people take part in an activity, a lot of it is just feel. Like you throw a ball, it just feels good. You don't look at the ball and go, that was 146 kilometer an hour pitch. Right?
Even thinking about it is funny because it's just right? You're just like, damn.
Right? Like, you're just like, ooh.
Damn, girl.
Yeah.
I threw that hard.
Yeah, and then maybe you do one that's 148 and you're like, I think that was faster? Like, you know, you just feel the ball and you see it and you hear it like hit the like mitt or whatever. Yeah. You know, I don't think it's like, all right, so statistically, like I'm 182 centimeters tall and you know the wind is blowing at X. Like I think it's not
the whole if you're
impersonating like a conscious engagement with the feedback that they're getting from the system. But I think that conscious engagement is not in the form of like math. The conscious engagement is in the form of like feeling. And so my point is like I don't think it's very useful was like the fundamentals that Sam is proposing because I actually don't think this is I don't think that it changes anything.
Well, I don't think it's supposed to change anything, but rather add a new layer under it. Like it's just like saying
well, perhaps
it's about like chunking things smaller so that you have less to think about, right? So it's like instead of thinking of laning, blah 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 blah, it's like 9 different things. Now you have 4 different things to think about that all branch out from that, and so your thought process becomes more efficient in that way.
I don't necessarily know that that's the argument that I'm trying to make.
Yeah,
I guess. I think for me, what I'm trying to say, the use in defining it this way is that when you look at what an astoundingly good player does differently than a very good player, right? It often comes down to that they are able to win the fight by like 5 or 10 HP, right? They are able to predict the damage down to that level. When an astoundingly good player dodges a skill shot from a very, very good player, it is often by mere pixels. The very good player thought they could hit it, and they were then instructed by the astoundingly good player that they could not. The movement foresight was better for the player that dodged it.
Is it
the character?
Is it kind of like? Can I just jump in for a sec? Is that kind of like saying that NBA players are better at being tall?
Well, yes, no, I don't know, really, because it's not like being tall is a skill.
Well, that's my point.
Yep.
So
I don't
are you
think
saying
that
that?
it's-
Are you saying that movement foresight and damn
It's
character foresight?
they might
movement-
be they may not be better at being tall, but I bet you they have well, maybe not, but my argument would be I bet they have a better perception of height than the average person does. I bet if you got a bunch of basketball players to go estimate the heights of other people, they would have a small edge over the average person. But probably not. You know what I mean? It's like that's the sort of argument I would want to be trying to make.
Well, the thing is though, is like you can train damage foresight, movement foresight, Yomi, and whatever the other one, and you can't train all.
Yeah,
right.
Instead of training movement foresight in traditional sports, you train actual movement. Right? You ask somebody to, throw 10 basketball shots. They're going to be able. By the time the ball has left their hands, they have a better mental model of where that ball is going to end up at the end of the arc than the average person does. The average person is going to lob it. They're not going to know exactly. They know it's going to go in the direction they threw it, but they're not going to know exactly where it's going to go. I feel like a lot of pro players are going to know almost exactly where it's going to go, and that's part of the passing and receiving game, right? Being able to look at a pass and see exactly where it's going to go rather than roughly where it's going to go is a skill.
Okay.
Same in League.
I think you're right. Like that, I'll give you that. I guess what feels kind of weird to me, and I think I derailed things with the comment about height. So I think you can have these four things that people who are good at the game will be better at than people who are not good at the game. Right?
Yes.
But my concern is if you look at, I guess, like what Matt Thornton is saying is a fundamental, I think that is quite clearly a different type of thing.
No, I waffled on saying yes to the Matt Thornton thing, and I think I'm going to go back on it and say, no, it's not a Matt Thornton fundamental.
Yeah,
it's the thing underneath Matt Thornton fundamental.
Well, I think you tried to use his definition, but I think you were kind of pointing at the wrong stuff.
Huh?
Well,
a fundamental is a skill. These are not.
I think
kind
your
of
things
skills?
kind of meet his definition, but this is my point. Is I just think that like the thing about the elbow escape or whatever, is none
that's
of
a
your
technique.
things is yeah. Well, he's saying it's a fundamental technique.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot more important. It's
actually that's a really it's like a fundamental.
Right?
It's a technique versus a skill, right?
Like last hitting is a fundamental, right?
Yes. It's a fundamental technique.
Then the way you approach the minion would be the technique.
I would argue that
last hitting is the technique.
Well, I wouldn't even say any of that. I would say that CSing is a technique. Damage foresight in order to understand how much your auto attack is going to do.
Hold on, go back. I contest that. CSing is a technique. I disagree.
Last hitting is a
CSing
technique.
skill
Is that better?
Constituted of a.
I'm using them interchangeably. CSing and last hitting.
I don't like you using them.
Okay, alright, so I will be specific. Last hitting is a technique. Damage foresight, movement foresight, character control.
I still disagree with that. Explain.
He has been explaining it though.
Okay.
I mean, so
what do you mean? What do you mean? Explain.
Okay, well, you're saying do you mean to me, last hitting is a process. It's like a group of techniques.
Okay.
So you can't say it is a technique.
Okay. No. You don't just get to say it's a group of techniques and then say you're wrong.
Sure. Okay,
tell me what group of techniques is it?
Okay, so you need to. There's the technique of actually clicking the minion.
Character control.
Right? Yeah. Well, yeah. Sure. I don't really care what you call it. For now. So there's the clicking the minion. There's observing the minion's health. There's the planning of why are you guys doing that? I don't think it matters.
I'm just trying to explain to you why I'm saying that these are the things that are below the fundamentals. It's because all of the things that you are mentioning, whether you want to add an extra layer.
I'm just making the point that you're saying technique when you don't. I don't think you mean technique. I'm not arguing.
So you're arguing that
things are not underneath the thing I'm talking about. I'm simply contesting the way you're using the word technique.
So what does technique mean to you? Because I think we're using it differently.
Yeah, well, so to me, a technique is the way that you do a specific, it's a technical way of doing a specific thing.
So what's the thing,
As
then?
in,
May
it's
I
like, I
interject
guess,
for a sec?
What would you call the thing that you're trying to do with techniques?
it seems, I guess the way I would think about a technique is it's like the smallest possible piece of the way of doing a thing.
Okay, yeah, that's a totally different definition than the one that I was trying to use.
Yeah.
The way I had considered
on
it,
the same page.
the way I considered it was when you said it was a group of techniques, which boils down to saying it's still a technique, even if it's made up of several techniques, right? So like that's kind of like how I was taking what you said, as far as like, oh, it's a technique, because there's groups of techniques that make up a bigger technique, right? So yeah, you can break out the technique smaller, but it doesn't mean that a group of techniques is no longer a technique.
Okay, I'm not comfortable with the language being used that way. And that's entirely, maybe that's just me, but that feels like it muddies the understanding. Does that,
Well,
like,
so
does
what's
it feel,
Sam's-
does it
what
feel
is
like
Sam's-
we're
What would
going
you,
wrong
I
to
guess
use
if you're
the word
going to
this way?
object to anything other than the smallest definable action being
Well, okay,
designated as
I
a
haven't
technique,
spent a lot of time thinking about how exactly I want to define this. So
Yeah.
I'm not. This is not the
Sure,
hill
sure.
I'm going to die on in terms of
Yeah.
like that is my definition.
so you know,
But it
whatever. I'm just saying,
My
like,
question
what
to you
word would
is,
you
if
like
you're
to
doing
use for the particular moment? What word would you like to use for the thing that is made up of multiple techniques?
a skill
A skill. Okay, so
yeah, let's go with that for now.
sure, we can agree that it's not perfect. but
Because
we'll
my
use it
question
for
would
the
just be,
moment.
if you're going to call that a technique, what are you going to call the parts of that? And I don't think we have a word for that.
Sure, I can accept that. So we'll say there, there's whatever it is that I'm defining. Then there's techniques, and then there's skills above those, right? And I would argue that what Matt Thornton is talking about is actually skills, not techniques. I think that an elbow escape is a series of techniques. You know what I mean?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Which is why I like the ring of fundamental technique better, which is why I would like to maybe even just reverse those, right? Maybe call a skill the lowest level or whatever. But it doesn't matter, right? I mean, it's the same thing.
I think that
It's just
up.
either whatever you want to say.
meaning of
I
those
just don't think it matters enough. I think it's just way too semantic.
Okay. I think if you were trying to teach techniques,
I think if you're trying to teach, you need to define your terms before you teach. That's the only thing that makes any sense, to be completely honest.
Well, I mean, if I was trying to teach someone, I wouldn't be saying this is a technique, this is a skill.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, but if you were to try to explain it to them, you wouldn't just throw out the words without